Welcome to the Iorì wase front page podcast. Some of the regulations regarding the production and processing of cannabis in the community have been enacted, and we speak with Mohawk Council of Kahnawake Chief Tonya Perron and Montour from the Kahnawake Cannabis Control Board about this.
Eagle's Nest Convenience and LaFleur's Restaurant, located on Route 207. Eagle's Nest, open daily from 8 to 11. Pick up something fresh from their deli counter. Open 8 to 6 on weekdays and 10 to 5 on Saturdays. And while you're out, grab some takeout or call in for delivery at LaFleur's Restaurant, open 11 to 7 from Sunday to Wednesday and 11 to 8 from Thursday to Saturday. All your needs in one convenient location.
Certain regulations pertaining to the Kahnawake Cannabis Control Law were recently enacted, and today we're sitting with Mohawk Council of Kahnawake Chief Tonya Perron and Chairperson of the Kahnawake Cannabis Control Board, Montour. Welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you for having us.
Can you explain what your role is, as the chairperson of the Kahnawake Cannabis Control Board?
Our role on the board is set out in the Cannabis Control Law. It's really to regulate, administer, and enforce the Cannabis Control Law as a board. So that's what we've been doing for the past, over 2 years now. And that's really what our role basically entails.
Okay, and Tonya, you're the lead portfolio chief on the file?
Yes, that's correct. I took over the portfolio in, I believe it was January of 2019 or thereabouts. And my role as portfolio chief back then was to ensure the creation, so the drafting, the development of the regulations by what's commonly referred to as like the technical drafting committee. In this case, it was composed of the board, which is three community members, a legal counsel, as well as myself. And at the time, Montour was also on the file with me. And we also had one of our internal legal counsels who was not necessarily involved in the drafting, but of course is responsible for the overall portfolio with me. So Brandon mentioned that the board has been working on this for all of that time. So yes, for the past roughly 2 years, maybe give a little bit, regulations have been worked on and different types of community engagement discussions, dialogue took place with stakeholders and organizational reps through the Health and Safety Committee.
The Kahnawake Cannabis Control Law was first passed in 2018?
Yes, December of 2018. So the law is, we commonly refer to that as like the skeletal, it's the skeleton. It sets out what's going to be allowed and what's not allowed, but it doesn't provide for all of the mechanism to actually implement it. So we needed all the pieces to say, okay, what's the criteria then for a certain kind of license? What are those licenses that are available? What's the eligibility criteria for the people applying, for the businesses? So there was a lot of work that still needed to be done, even though the law was enacted in 2018. And just last week, we finally enacted there's five regulations that were being drafted. 3 of those regulations were enacted in order to open up the application process for cultivation and processing.
Okay, so what are the regulations that were enacted?
The 3 regulations were the concerning prices, royalties, and contributions. That's one. The regulation concerning licensing requirements and procedures, and the regulation concerning cultivation, processing, and distribution.
Okay, so now officially the process is open for application for processing and cultivation license.
That's correct.
And so if somebody is interested in applying for either of these licenses, what's the process that they need to follow?
So the first thing you should do to note is to contact us at cannabis.board@mck.ca or call our office at 450-632-6201 to get the information that you would need to apply for these licenses. And in particular, for a standard cultivation license, if you have an idea that you want to open a large, standard cultivation facility, the very first step that you should be doing to note is to have a preliminary meeting with the council because as the law stipulates, for standard cultivation licenses, MCK needs to have an ownership interest, or they cannot have an ownership interest. It's really depends on that meeting how it goes. So that's the first step for the standard cultivation license. But other than that, the schedules that are attached to the regulation really stipulate everything that you would need to fill out, such as business entity information, personal information for conducting background checks, a detailed business plan, which are needed, and also I think what's important for standard cultivation and processing licenses, you would have to have a key person license application as well as part of that. So anyone who performs a key managerial function within the organization, such as CEO, COO, CFO, they'd have to apply as well. Anyone who would have access to that facility unaccompanied, basically, would also have to apply for those key license and applications, which are included in the regulations.
If somebody wants to apply for a standard cultivation license, how big of a facility are we talking about? What would the license allow them to do?
Yeah, so the regulation, they're quite detailed, and we've been drafting that for over, like I said, 2 years. So all the relevant information would be in there. But I think one important thing to highlight would be that distinguishes a micro cultivation facility from a standard cultivation is really the scale of the operation. Right now, if you're applying for a micro cultivation facility, the area that you're cultivating would not exceed 200 square meters. So anything that would be larger than that would really be standard cultivation. And I'd like to, just highlight that I mentioned, going through the application process with the KCCB, but as you know, in the law, it's a dual licensing process. So at the same time, you would have to be going to Health Canada simultaneously for those licenses as well.
I remember, I think as the law was being developed and passed, we're talking about limiting the number of licenses for certain things, right? Is there a limit on how many standard cultivation licenses there will be in the community?
No, there's no limit on the cultivation and processing licenses. There's a limit on a distribution license. It's one. And that, according to the regulations that were drafted, that distribution facility or licensee has to be, I think the wording, and I know this is going to create some grunting and grumbling. I believe the wording is like a band empowered entity, because it was meant to be it's the middleman. So that license is only available to that one entity, which would have to be somehow linked to council. So if that's not the correct wording, I apologize. But in my mind, it's something akin to that, the wording. And for dispensaries, there's going to be a limit under the regulations, even though the dispensary licenses are not available at this time and the moratorium is still in place for those. There will only be a maximum of 3 for the moment. And that was all as a result of some surveys that were done and some dialogue, consultation, engagement, whatever you want to call it, with community and, like I said, the organizational, the reps for your different organizations in the community. So for the cultivation and processing, there's no limit on the licenses, but just our land base alone and the resources that we have will naturally limit how many of those you could have, as well as some of the criteria that the board included in the regulations in terms of location. So there'll be a natural limit that'll happen, but there's no cap that's specific.
Okay. And again, we're talking about just cultivation and processing licenses that are available. And I know I think there's a lot of discussion in the community about when dispensaries would be allowed to be open. Do we have a time frame on when those regulations will be complete, and an outlook on when some of these dispensaries can be opened?
So the regulations themselves in a draft form are pretty much complete. There's a few pieces, though, to actually setting it up that are missing, which is why it can't be enacted and open up at the moment. I've been asked a number of times for time frame, and of course, I hate giving a time frame because I feel like somebody holds a gun to my head when I don't meet that time, those time frames. But I will say that I have expressed within 3 months to have everything opening up for the dispensary licenses. So I will, of course, ask that if it's not at the exact 3-month mark and it's a week or 2 later or so, that I don't be held to that. But I am really trying to have all of those pieces in place in a timely fashion. I know that I don't want to call it a misconception, but there's a belief out there that it's very easy. You just gotta, just do this and this and we can open up, kind of a thing. But in terms of where I sit and the role that I play, it's not that simple. And it's not because we're asking permission from anybody. And that's the other, misnomer or misconception or misunderstanding that's out there. It's not a matter of requesting permission. It's a matter of protecting our jurisdiction and protecting the people that will be in the business. And so my role is to ensure that, I get all of that in place so that it's going to be hassle-free, or, as hassle-free as possible. And that we don't have all kinds of hurdles or kinks or bumps in the road. We may have a few, but we don't want to have huge potholes either. So recognizing that, and also, ensuring that it's regulated effectively because of all of, safety, health concerns, safety concerns. There's a lot of work that, needed to be done, and there's a bit that still needs to be done.
And with the applications that are open now, is there a deadline, or is it kind of an open deadline, and whenever somebody has interest in getting involved in this type of business, they can just contact the board and go from there?
Yeah, so October 25th was the official launch of the application for cultivation and processing. And like I mentioned, or like you mentioned, there's no deadline. It's a rolling basis, but like I mentioned, it's a dual licensing process. So it's a tedious process, and it takes, quite some time, and with the Health Canada side as well. So, you shouldn't be waiting until, others in the field in the area get the ball rolling. And then you see these facilities going up. And like Tonya mentioned, we only have so much land, and we're not going to be, giving an unlimited amount of applications out or accepting a bunch of applications to open up shop here in Kahnawake. So I don't think you really need to wait. I think you should, if you're thinking about this, the time should have already started, or now should be the time.
And since the applications opened earlier this week, has there been a lot of interest from community members in getting more information?
Yeah, I would say I've been approached about just about how the process works. A lot of community members, who might not have been aware, like Tonya was mentioning, it's difficult to see that because we've been trying to really promote it and trying to get the word out to the community that this is open, and the community should be aware that it is like that. And our office manager has received a lot of requests, and really it's been a smooth process so far. And I think that people are interested, and I'm hoping that it all goes well.
Okay, and we're talking about earlier. I think the regulations about community contributions. Can we talk a little bit more about that? And I know that was one of the things that was up for a lot of discussion during the CDMP process for the law, and so somebody gets involved in the business in this industry, and then now is starting to make money and has to contribute back to the community. And how is that done?
So if you take a look at the regulations that were recently enacted, there's a 5-year projection, so to speak, in terms of the remittances. It's a yearly remittance based on total cannabis revenue. So at the end of the first year, correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, I think it's 0.5%.
Yeah,
of that revenue.
Yeah, and then it would increase thereafter, year after year.
Okay.
Up to maxes out at 2.5 in the fifth year.
Yeah.
So in order to give the businesses, that leeway that they need to start generating revenue, it starts off at 0.5%. No matter what kind of license that you have, that's the mandatory community contribution on your total cannabis revenue. There's a reason why it's worded like that. It's distinct from other types of revenue in that world of revenue generation. I'm not really sure, but and then it increases with every year, because by year 5, most businesses are up and running and should be, they should have recapped any capital, whatever the case may be. So it increases over time. So as the businesses make more money, the community contribution also increases, and therefore the community benefits more.
And then once, I guess, everything's up and running, where would these community contributions be going to?
So they are supposed to be sent to, or deposited in what's going to be a socioeconomic fund. I don't really know the word that will be used to describe that fund yet. We're still kind of trying to figure out, is there a cultural term we can use that's more appropriate to describe what that is, because it is going to be for socioeconomic community ventures. The only thing I can say for the moment, because it isn't set up, we're still in the works of trying to figure out not what it looks like. It's not very complicated, but in terms of, is there an oversight body? Is there going to be a committee that oversees it, which there should be? What's the composition of it? I've had people come to me and say it should be at least, some community members on it, because if it's a community contribution, that there should be that oversight. So exploring, all of those opportunities and different compositions that can happen for it. But I have said, and I will say it again, that fund for me has to be completely separate from any other fund or account that we have at council. It's not done yet, but I am, like I said, stressing that has to be the case, because the money's coming from this industry, in my opinion, have to all be very apparent, transparent, accountable to the community. And the community has to have access to all of that information. Because if you'll recall, Greg, during all of the discussions that happened with the law, there was a lot of concern about that, right, from community members that, well, how do we get a benefit too? because only certain people might be able to get into the industry, whether it's on account of the money, the resources it takes to actually get it started, et cetera. And so the community really wanted to see some type of benefit going back, even if it was going to be privatized, right? You have private owners. So I think it's going to be really important for that fund to be very transparent. And as I said, to have maybe some sort of representation from the community on it, but it's not yet set up. So I can't tell you what it looks like yet. I can tell you what my ideas are, though, and what my discussion has been with just people here and there in the community about it.
And I guess it's going to be set up it needs to be set up very soon if licenses our applications are being accepted for businesses to get involved in this now, right?
So I figure we have a year, because it's the remittances are after the first year, right? So let's say somebody was licensed today, they're only going to be remitting within a year anyway. So I'm not saying we're going to wait a year to do that, but yes, it's going to be set up very shortly. And once that's set up, then the calculation and the remittance will happen only a year after, at the end of the first fiscal year for the business.
Yeah. And if I could add to that too, the regulation sets out that the formula for calculating community contributions could be amended annually from time to time by the MCK and by, most importantly, the board. And I think that's important to note, because hearing these numbers, it might be frightening for those that are interested in getting in the industry hearing these numbers, but, we can't forecast exactly what the revenue will be. So if we see that these numbers are out of touch with reality, we can adjust them. So, 0.5% to the fifth year, 2.5% of total cannabis revenue. I think it's important to note that, the regulation sets out that we do have the capacity to change that if we see that those numbers aren't working.
Okay.
Yeah, if they're too high or too low.
Yeah.
Depends on how is this all going to roll out and where's it going to go? Because I don't want to say if it fails, but I mean, if it's not as prosperous as we believe, based on all of the studies and everything we know about it as it should be, maybe the numbers have to be readjusted. But if it exceeds expectations, then the numbers may have to be adjusted in a different vein, right? So either up or down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those adjustments, they are recommendations that come from the board, and it would be the board at the end of the day, but in consultation with the council, because I believe in the law, it actually states that those are determined in consultation with council, because obviously there has to be some links. It can't just be completely independent, right? But there still has to be that, as much as possible, hands-off approach from council.
Okay. Is there anything else either you would like to add?
I think just important as a reminder, and people are probably rolling their eyes hearing me if they're hearing me say this again, moratorium is still in place for the dispensaries and retail. So the licenses are not available, and you need one if you want to actually open up retail or dispensary. And secondly, cultivation and processing, although the moratorium has been lifted there, obviously means that you can only do that with the dual licensing, one from Health Canada and one from the board.
Yeah. And also just important to note, I don't think I mentioned this, but right now the applications that are open, that's stage 1 of the application process. Those that would have looked at the regulations would see that it's actually done in 3 stages. So all the stuff that I outlined earlier for the cultivation license, for example, that's stage 1. After that, we get all that information. We vet it to make sure that, all is in order. And then the applicants would then move on to stage 2. And then after that, with the stage 2 details, that we would release that to the applicants and make sure that they can successfully move on to stage 3. So this isn't the information that they have at the applications. That's not all that has to be done. There has to be more that has to be done to get to the next stage, which requires, more information such as, layouts of the building, et cetera, to show that, that you're really serious about this and that it's more than just, signing your name and saying you want to apply. So it's important to note that, those who have applied already or are in the process know that there's multiple stages. And I think that was important to shed a light on.
Yeah, and I maybe should just come back to that whole Health Canada issue. I know I discussed it a couple of weeks ago somewhere else. I don't remember where, but the MOU with Health Canada, that is the whole reason for that MOU, is because of this dual licensing. And really, it's to provide for that flow of information between Health Canada and our board, but also to ensure that there's eventually transfer of knowledge from Health Canada to our board and or inspectors, because we want to develop this, right? And we want to grow and be able to fully regulate it all on our own, develop the expertise required. And so the MOU really pertains to that, and pertains also to, the inspections, like what has to be done to carry them out. They have to be accompanied by somebody from the board or an inspection office that will eventually be developed as well. And so there's nothing in there that talks like about jurisdiction. So it's not really touching on any of that. It's really just touching on the information sharing and ensuring that everything is being regulated and on the up and up, so to speak. And like it's been mentioned a number of times in the past, it's meant to be, and when I say temporary, it doesn't mean next week that it's going to change, but it's meant to be a temporary measure until we have everything we need in place to be fully functioning regulatory wise, which also includes, of course, people going to school and learning about, say, quality assurance practices, or I'm sorry, I'm not very good with all of the terminology for best practices. Anyways, there's a lot to be learned about the plant, how you grow it, how you do it safe, what you need for this and that, right? And so there are people in our community, from what I've heard, that have started educating themselves on that. So that's great because it allows us to build that capacity and eventually be, could all be completely internal. So I wanted to mention that again because I did have some questions again about that MOU and the concerns, some concerns that were around it, but really there's nothing that is of concern in my mind. I was very careful, in coming to that MOU of what was included in it and what was not, and the wording around it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I guess we'll be talking to you guys more about this in the coming months.
Maybe in about 3 months, about dispensaries.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Now go everyone for listening, and be sure to be on the lookout for our other podcasts, including Iorì Profiles with Abigail Jacobs and Movement is Medicine with Mark Lalonde. This project has been made possible by the Community Media Strategic Support Fund, offered jointly by the Official Language Minority Community Media Consortium and the Government of Canada.
The views and opinions of the guests expressed in this podcast do not reflect those of wase and its employees.